Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started so that we can have a great discussion and then enjoy some lunch. Our second panel, labeled What Are Others Doing? Comparative Lessons on Water and Energy, does exactly what it says on that label. Countries can often learn valuable lessons from the experiences of others working in that space, and the consideration of different cultures and priorities can be crucial for policy making. Just as in our first panel, I'm going to ask you to hold your questions till the end, and we are hoping to have about 20 minutes for a discussion on this panel. The first speaker today is Mr. Liben Zhang. Mr. Zhang is a partner with Broad & Bright in Beijing, China, and his practice focuses on foreign direct investment, mergers and acquisitions, arbitration, energy, and the environment. Today he will illuminate the Chinese perspective and priorities on the water and energy nexus.
Well, thank you very much thanks Regina, and thanks to Baker Institute for inviting me to speak at this, legendary and great institution which contributes to the topic of energy and water and other issues. And when I come to this building just now, I was stricken by the the slogan about the bridge between the world of ideas and the world of actions. And that's what I'm exactly doing after I graduated from UT Law School back in 1997. Okay, so after graduation from law school, I went back and then practiced, and also advised the private sector as well as the government on the liberalization of the energy sector. I'm also an arbitrator. I handle disputes in energy, representing ConocoPhillips in oil spill cases, and recently, we're advising Chinese government to break up the monopoly of the oil and gas sector, and also how to grant the mineral rights of the oil and gas blocks in China. So this is something in transition which is happening, and it's good that we're witnessing the changes. So you will see a lot of things happening in China as time comes. So should I just press this one? This one, yeah. This one. Yes, yeah. Okay. Now, I'm not an expert in water, but I try my best, try to do good job in explaining as to the relationship between the energy and water. Okay. There is a famous professor in China called Li Yan, and he wrote in his recent article, he said that Chinese has a culture of worshiping the water, and the dragon in Western culture is something, really related to devils, but in China, the dragon is something very good, okay? And I'm born in the year of the dragon, so dragon is something like relating to a good leader who can command things, get things done. Dragon, as a symbol of water, has a lot of power. It has power of, when and how much water it can get for people. So therefore, in Chinese culture, there develops a culture of worshiping the god of water, or Long Wangye. Long Wangye is like the dragon king lord, which you translate literally. And the other than the Han nationality, the male minorities in China, in the Guizhou province, which is in southwest China, also has the culture of worshiping the water, as well as worshiping the trees and the mountains, because they believe that water, like trees and mountain, have souls. And so therefore they have the customs rules of treating the water very nicely. Chinese old ancient saint Confucius said, water can carry the boat, water can also overturn the boat. So therefore, water has, both sides. One is the positive side, another is the negative side. It can do good things and bad things. On this slide, you can see that, there's, two great projects done in China. So really, the Chinese history is about two things. Chinese history is about how to get the benefits of water and also how to prevent and avoid the harm of water. Because the Yellow River, which is the mother river of Chinese culture, carries a lot of mud and sand. So therefore, towards the midstream and downstream of the Yellow River, the riverbed becomes so elevated that there's a danger of flooding the adjacent areas. So Chinese people over the different dynasties have built the Yellow River levee as long as 1,500 kilometers. And this could be viewed really a great Chinese project second to the Great Wall in China. So people know about Great Wall in China, but probably people don't know about this Yellow River levee. So if you're interested in that, you can go to China and take a look. The other great project of water-related project in China is the Chengdu, Chuanxi Chengdu project in the Sichuan province. This is, a world's earliest existing artificial irrigation project. It was built in BC 256 BC, and now it is still covering the irrigation of the land over 5,300 square meters of land. So still working. So you can see that the 30% of farmland in China was under artificial irrigation back in 15th century, and over the time in the subsequent 5 centuries until now, Chinese farmland continued to increase, but then the percentage of the artificial irrigated land continued to grow, and it becomes exceptionally high as compared with the artificial irrigated land compared with Europe and India. China's farmland, which accounts only for 8.6% of the world's farmland, is feeding a population of 1.3 billion people, which accounts 20% of the world's population. So because of this, the Mao Zedong, the first Chinese communist leader, said, water utilization is the lifeblood of the agriculture. So that shows how the water utilization is important. Get some water. Yeah, I need energy and I need water too. This is a map showing the amount of precipitation or the rainfalls. Okay, what it shows is that China, have more rainfalls in the south, in the east, and then gradually becomes less rainfalls to the north and west. Okay, so this is about rainfalls, and also combining the water sources from rivers and lakes and together with rainfalls and groundwater, the distribution of water resources in China is like this. What it shows up there is that, again, north and west are very dry and semi-dry, and then the east and west is, has more water and more humid, okay, and ample water. So that's, the water resources, layout in China. What are the problems of China's water problem? Okay, with China's freshwater supply of 600 billion tons at tipping point, and Chinese freshwater occupation per capita, per person, is only 1/4 of that of the world. China is suffering a severe shortage of water, and I think this is probably more serious than the situation in the U.S. I've just now seeing the pictures of what Case has shown about devastating situation of the land. I think in China the shortage of water is more serious. Beijing Energy Club, where I'm a member, have a conference on this same topic, and our conclusion is that if we want to develop any plan to solve the water shortage in the energy sector, we have to assume that this basic restriction is valid, that there could be no further increase of water resources. And so anything we do to develop energy have to be something like energy efficiency, or using less water, or have more efficiency in using water. But we cannot hope on any addition of water resources over what we have right now. So this is a basic assumption, and that's the condition we have. The other big problem of Chinese water energy nexus is that the water resources are geographically unbalanced, with more water in the south and east and less water in the north and west. And that problem, that unbalancing problem, is even worsened by the situation that Chinese energy resources like the coal and oil and gas are pretty much located in the north and west. So therefore, the energy resources are located in areas where we have less water. Okay. Chinese previous Premier Wen Jiabao, requests in 2005 in his work report in the National People's Congress that there is a red line which cannot be overpassed. That is, China has to protect 1.8 billion mu of cultivated land for Chinese farming industry, and that's the baseline. There could be no more reduction of that area of cultivated land. Otherwise, China will have severe food shortage problem. So the red line protection requires securing supply of agricultural water, without which the red line protection would not be possible. Okay, so that shows how the water relates to Chinese farming industry. Chinese government right now is caught in a dilemma between food security and energy security, okay, and with limitation of water. The water restricts the economic and social development right now. In China, water supply for household use is still top priority. So now we are caught in multiple purpose of water use. Agricultural use, which is for irrigation, for farmland, and for energy, as well as for the household use, for everyday use. Okay. What this case shows, is interesting. Since I'm a lawyer, I would like to add something about legal, not only talking about policies and economics and geography. So this case is like this. In a village, the local government built a water park in 1998, and the construction was consented by the villagers. To provide water to the park, the government trapped and channeled the water from the creek, which is located in the village. In 2001, the water park becomes a water resort, and it was operated by a local government-run operator. The villagers found that the riverbed of the upstream becomes dry due to the trapping and channeling of the water. In September 2004, the villagers sued the resort for a court order to dismantle the water trapping device and return the creek into original flow. What the court did is very creative. Okay, I think this is probably because that the court is sort of being, in a difficult situation, not to, shut down the government-run water park, just give priority to the villagers. But if it failed to give priority to the villagers' household use, it's also politically not correct because the water law and Chinese policy gave top priority to the household use of people. So what the court did is that they have this time allocation resolution that the resort is allowed to allow the creek water to flow from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. of the next day in its natural stream by making changes to the water trapping and channeling device, and then further order that the creek water may be channeled into the water park from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. during the daytime. So there's a time allocation. Neither the court and the villagers accept this, first instance judgment, and they appealed. Finally, the second instance court dismissed the appealing and then still, sustain the trial judgment. So what this shows is that I want to use this case to show you that, first of all, there's a limitation of water in China everywhere, even in the mountains. And secondly, as between the household use and the economic or commercial use of water, the government is trying to make a compromise, between the two usages. So water energy nexus in China, what is the situation? Okay, let's talk about the coal and oil gas as compared with water supply. The geographical distribution of coal and oil and gas and water is mismatched, as I said, as coal and oil and gas resources mainly lie in the northwest and north of China, contrary to the distribution of water. Water pollution may occur in the coal exploration, exploitation, washing and processing, transforming and utilization, etc. The coal exploitation leads to the damage to the underground water, but the impact on water by the coal exploitation is less urgent on the air and the ground collapse. This is illustrated in Shanxi province, which is beside the Yellow River. Okay? Because Shanxi province is so rich with its coal resources, now it seems that this is a typical example of the resources curse, that the whole province relying on the coal resources and no other industry, but now it's much pollution in there, and the water is polluted there, and it's very desperate. Okay, so there is a big issue as to how the province will develop in the future, because once the coal is industry is much affected because the economy is slowing down, there's less demand of coal. Basically, the economy of the whole province is coming to a severe slowdown, and then people have problems. Okay. I'm not going to go talk about the exact figures about the damages. There are many reports about the damages of the groundwater and the surface water in the Shanxi province and other places in China. So this is just to show you an example briefly. The more significant water energy nexus problem is the large consumption of water in coal gasification and liquefaction. Okay. Also you talk about the coal to gas and coal to oil. There is a big debate in China as to whether Chinese completely abandon coal and switch to gas. Coal account for 70% of energy mix in China. So practically speaking, it's not possible to completely, abandon coal and switch to natural gas. The problem is that, how to, make the coal clean. And also the gas to coal and gas to oil is also causing a lot of, pollution and also using a lot of water. So that is really a challenge. So I think that the water challenge for coal is not so much for the traditional coal mining, but is more so for the coal to gas and coal to oil. Let's look at the water energy nexus issue in the oil and gas. Water consumption in oil and gas exploration is high. Pressure for water in the conventional oil and gas is not serious, as traditionally its exploitation adopts underground flooding and the water can be recycled. So this is what I talked with the energy expert in China. They told me that the oil and gas drilling, they use the underground water, and so therefore it's not so much a big issue. And also, the water can be recycled. So therefore, the water for traditional oil and gas is not a big problem. The big problem probably is more for hydraulic fracking of shale gas. Shale gas right now in China is very hot. Theoretically, China has, probably the same amount of shale gas resources as in the U.S., but the geographical structure is more complicated, and the cost of drilling is bigger. So right now, the first, a hot area where people are drilling for shale gas in China is called Fuling, near in Chongqing city, and Fuling. Interestingly, its geographical structure is something like the karst landform. Karst landform is what is shown in this picture on the right, that it has those rocks, which is complicated. And, there can be rain, but then still it can be dry because the water flows underground. So if you are using the underground water in the karst landform for drilling shale gas, and then very likely you are changing the channels of the underground water, and the water which has been used by people for generations will suddenly disappear, okay? Because there's some explosions, fracking, so on and so forth. So therefore, Sinopec in Fuling has to switch to other source of water, not the groundwater in Fuling. So they're switching the water supply in the Yangtze River, and also to Wujiang, which is a obligatory, contributory river of Yangtze River. Okay, that's where the water comes from for the drilling of the shale gas. This picture on the left is what the drilling is like in Daqing oil field. I went there, in the middle of the year, and the topic there is that how this city can survive after the oil and gas resources become exhausted, and I was trying to compare the Daqing oil city to Houston. I think this is a topic which I like. Houston is not only living on oil and gas, but also develop the Medicare and the healthcare, banking, other sectors. But in Daqing, the whole city is built on oil and gas. It has fed the whole nation with oil in the past 30 years. But now there's a problem that probably in 10 or 20 years, the city will be running out of gas and oil. So what will the future be for Daqing? That's a very big problem. Let's talk about nuclear and hydropower. Okay, Chinese major concern of nuclear is not with water; it's about the security. Okay, and now, China is talking about the inland, nuclear right now. 3 projects are being considered. One is Taohuajiang in Hubei province. The other is Shenning in the Hunan province and Pengze in Jiangxi province. These are the sites near the Yangtze River. So very likely, the 3 sites will use the water from the Yangtze River. So therefore, I think that the danger is that there is a risk of water pollution of the river if there is any nuclear accident. Okay, just like what happened in Japan. But what happened in Japan is that they can dump into the sea. But for this one, I think that you have to. If you dump into the river and then that's extremely harmful for people. Okay. So hydropower in China accounts for 7% of the China energy mix, about 250 million kilowatts. Water used for hydropower can be recycled, and hydropower is renewable energy. So what can we do for hydropower in the future? Hydropower in China has enjoyed its golden development period in the last 10 years. Okay, a rapid development, and I think probably in the next 10 years, China can still develop hydropower, but then can gradually slow down because of the limitation of the water resources. And if China utilizes its available water resources to the fullest extent for hydropower generation, the maximum of hydropower in the energy mix could be only up to 9%, and that's the limit. Okay, so from 7% up to 9%, that's the limit. No further potential for developing hydropower. So there's a limit, okay, for that. So China have to think about other things, not hydropower. Okay. And also, overdevelopment of hydropower from the transnational rivers will also give rise to the conflicts with the neighboring states. Okay, so if China, develop hydropower in the Yalu Zangbujiang, which originate from the Mount Everest, I think that the downstream people would be having problem. Okay. The Three Gorges project is one example which caused bio-environmental problems. So people this is a hot topic right now, talking about how this project started without the good study, and the petrochemical sector also has problem in a way that, the CNPC's petrochemical plant, exploded back in 2005, and the river was polluted and causing issues with Russia. I think that we're running out of time, right? Okay, yeah. Let me. I think that if you're interested in this, slides, I can just send it to you. It has everything I want to say about this. I'm very passionate about this, because it has a lot of interesting, materials in there. So this shows what Chinese government has done and what about the water energy nexus. And the Beijing Energy Club in 2014, where I'm a member, we also have a similar workshop like this one, talking about the water resources. And our conclusion is very clear. And in that workshop, the BP's chief economist, Helen Williams, gave a speech and summarized her views with 4 R's: replacement, reuse, recycle, and regional responsibility. And what we can do is that we just convert those 4 R's into policies and laws. And this shows the relationship, which I think is which I copied from the DOE, but then adding my own understanding. And so I like that if the water becomes more expensive, more scarce, I think that will make the energy produced with water more expensive. But that will also give rise to the future of the solar and the wind, the renewables, because in the future, when the water becomes expensive, and water industry will develop. When I worked in Siemens as the M&A head for M&A Siemens. Siemens eventually gave up the water project because the water projects are too not profitable. Okay, and also desalination project in China also is now being abandoned with foreign investors leaving China. What's the problem? The problem is that the water price is too low, and that makes the project very unlucrative. I have this slides which I saw on flight to here from China. I hope that we are able to handle the water energy nexus issue, not to make our Earth look like this, so that we have to flee to the Elysium. Okay, this is something I like. We know about the Descartes. Descartes is a philosopher. He talked about the causation theory, and then there's another famous philosopher called L.V. Burton Lanfey, and his theory is called the system theory. So what we think about this is, I want to use this to create a solution to look at water energy nexus. Is that before we think about water and energy as a separate issue, a separate system, but actually, the whole world is really a combination of systems with different elements interacting with each other, and our life, our human body is a system, a water and energy system, and then they combine is a complex system. So the solution for solving this systematic problem is to improve the water use efficiency, reduction of water use, and to achieve that we need technology breakthrough and system reform and better and coordinate policies and laws. I think that these conclusions are similar to what the previous speakers talk about. I have in the slides following the basic principles of Chinese water law. So in a word, without going to those details of those cases, which I find very interesting, is that Chinese, water resources are state-owned, okay, and you have to pay for it, with a fee, so that you can get the water right. But there is an exception to that. If you are a household next to the river, you are allowed to use the water in a reasonable amount, but not for economic purpose. Okay, so if you want to build a factory, then you have to get water right. But then if you just use water for family use, and then it's free. Okay? And for many water right disputes, China tried to solve the disputes by conciliation. They don't encourage people to sue each other, and China don't accept the what is that? The aspiring right? Yeah, it's pairing right. Where no, in China, no, in the U.S. You have the priority right. First right, first use right. But China doesn't allow that. China allows the reasonable use and accommodation. So the Chinese real right law says if you're adjacent owners of the land and your land has a water source, you have to allow your neighbors to use it, a reasonable amount. You have to give accommodation. Okay, so this is like encouraging more compromise, and so the cases following that is very interesting. I wouldn't go into details. So one case is that Chinese court declined the claim for damages, but asked the two adjacent owners to enforce the settlement agreement to have a more agreed use of the water instead of suing each other and paying damages. So that's, I think, probably make people think about Chinese culture of less litigant as U.S. culture. Okay? Yeah. So thank you very much.
The second speaker on our international panel today is Elena López-Gunn. Elena is a Cheney Research Fellow at the University of Leeds in the United Kingdom and the founder and director of eCatalyst, which is an environmental consulting firm in Madrid. Today, Elena is going to share with us a study that she has been preparing for the European Commission, which looks at the future of the water, energy, and food nexus, particularly in light of climate change. Please welcome Elena López-Gunn.
I'm just going.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just easier.
Unfinished task.
It's all right. It's all right.
That's okay.
Sorry. Okay, so I'll actually start where Kate finished. She said, someone that's kind of brave enough to take on the whole Nexus, and I've been looking at it for the last 6 months, and I do get to sleep. I think at the moment it's more jet lag, why I don't actually get to sleep rather than. But it is quite complex, and I actually quite like, my co-speaker when he was talking about systems theory. I think that's very much at the heart of trying to understand the Nexus. Okay, so hopefully this goes. Yeah. Okay, so this is the outline of my presentation. I'm first going to explain, the coming of the Nexus. Why we're here now, looking at it. I will say that although it's a relatively young concept, broadly known now as there's been an evolution in the conceptual frames, and we're now moving to more the applied cases and making it kind of operational. And then I will very briefly tell you about this study that we're just kind of completing now that we've done for the European Commission. It's part of actually the foresight unit of the DG Research and Innovation. So it's a part of the European Commission, which is like the EU government, is the Ministry for Science and Technology, basically. Very briefly tell you the methodology that we have used and also the kind of main results and key findings. And I will kind of rush through it because we don't have long, but we will definitely share the report when it's finished with anyone that's interested. Okay, so the coming of the Nexus. The first thing that I wanted to explain is we now think that we live through what we call exponential times. The kind of population growth, the fertilizer use, energy use, water use. We've never seen this in the planet ever before. So in a way, it's partly kind of linked to exponential consumption of us humans on planet Earth. And one of the things that we're starting to kind of really think is how can we decouple these systems, because the more we use, in a way, the more impact we have. And at some point, all this kind of, the convergence of all this consumption of the same resources eventually basically conflict. And that's what the Nexus is about. Okay, so you can see here, for example, a classic case on energy and food. You can see here that the kind of heavy correlation between, for example, food price and energy price index. So in a way we can see, and sometimes some people actually argue that some of the kind of things we've seen in the Middle East could be related to this kind of coupling of in this case, indexes. Okay, another one, for example, biofuels were not all born equal. It's not the same if you use, say, sugar beet, maize, sugar cane, rapeseed, soybean. From a biofuel perspective on energy, they might be similar. I don't know, I'm more of a water person, but they're not definitely the same from the water perspective. And I would even argue then there's first generation biofuels, second generation, third generation biofuels. So we're starting to really kind of look at things much more detailed, not only from the energy, but look also at the water perspective. Okay, and a classic triple whammy, groundwater. Groundwater, for example, you can see here the exponential growth in India, and it's probably, you know, one of the main consequences why India has actually successfully developed in terms of human development is groundwater use. But here's what you have when you have subsidized electricity. You know, you overpump. So as you can see here, it's a classic example. But at the same time, you have people actually being fed. So it's very difficult, you know, you have very difficult choices here for countries like, for example, India or indeed China, from my previous speaker. Another one, you know, when you look at irrigated agriculture, it doesn't matter if you look at surface water or if you look at groundwater. In surface water, you will use it for fertilizer use. Energy is embedded in there. If you look at our groundwater, it's because you're pumping. So energy, again, is very, very linked to kind of irrigated agriculture. And here's where we're starting to move towards the nexus. We're trying to say, okay, we now understand that these kind of sectors and these resources are heavily interconnected. So it's all about trade-offs and synergies. And that's where I think we're really starting to kind of make headway, you know, as some of the previous speakers were talking about. So for example, we could have wins, you know, where we have, you know, as Kate mentioned, energy efficiency is definitely the kind of low-hanging fruit. Or for example, increasing agricultural productivity. Particularly in rain-fed systems, actually, not so much in irrigated systems. But we also have, you know, the issue that I mentioned before of, you know, when we subsidize electricity, it actually has a knock-on effect, for example, on groundwater over abstraction. Or, for example, you know, when we're starting to understand that, you know, shale gas exploration, you know, and exploitation can actually have particular impact in kind of semi-arid regions where quite often this kind of shale gas formations are actually based. So, and then disruptive events, you know, one of the slides I found really interesting is we never think about the cloud as energy intensive, but it is. So, in a way, we're kind of thinking, you know, we're facing also new challenges as we all become more integrated and also more connected. Okay, so the conceptual frame. So now I've kind of, in a way, outlined, you know, this nexus and how, given some examples of why they're so connected. I'm now very quickly, I'm going to kind of rush through the conceptual frames. I'm definitely not going to go into them. You know, I've actually got a PhD student who's just kind of finished this, and it's very, very detailed. But just to say that it all started relatively not that long ago. The first was a big conference in Bonn. Then the International Water Association started to kind of look into it. People like the EasyMod is a research center based in Nepal. They're very, very much in the Himalayas. You know, with climate change, they're very much aware of all these issues. The IISD, a think tank in Canada, is also looking at the think tank. Then we moved on to the UN, and most of the UN agencies now are actually looking at the Nexus very, very much and have actually ongoing projects. And the kind of latest report actually was done by a professor only next door, Professor Ravi Mota, who led a report, a very good report for IRENA, on renewable energies from the perspective of the nexus. But also the private sector. The private sector is very much looking into it as well. You know, we have the World Economic Forum, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and then, for example, the one on the bottom left is actually a European Innovation Action Group. It's kind of the innovation groups that the European Union is trying to foster. It's very much focused on water and energy. But then the last thing that we're seeing is actually countries that are starting to take this and say, okay, we're going to put it into the heart of our research programs. And the best example at the moment is, for example, is particularly the UK, which actually now has pulled the ESRC, which is a social kind of research body for social sciences, and also the EPSRC, which is the engineering and technology, into a joint fund to look into the issue of the nexus. The European Commission, I'm now going to gradually move to the study that we've actually done for the European Commission. The research body of the European Commission is called the Joint Research Centre. We had a workshop about 3 weeks ago in Brussels, and they presented the study. They're actually doing a very detailed study on the Sava Basin, which is a kind of tributary of the Danube, you know, where all these issues, particularly this summer, for example, we've had a heat wave in Europe, has huge consequences, for example, for hydropower. So they're starting to try and understand, okay, if we model these systems together, what does it mean, for example, for hydropower production in Europe? Because we have, our systems are linked, so that also, obviously, to try and kind of understand our systems so we can actually adapt to them. And also for the issue of thermal power plants. Okay, with that, I'm now very quickly taking you to my study. It was a study commissioned by the Foresight Unit of the European Commission, DG Research and Innovation. And to give you the background, the European Union is a kind of funny entity because it has sovereign states which have pooled their sovereignty for some policies. In some policies, they're almost completely devolved, which is, for example, the case of agriculture. In some cases, they're kind of shared, which is the case of energy. And in the case of water, it's mainly EU. So in a way, that's why the Nexus, in a way, was important for the European Commission to see, okay, if we're looking at future policies of the European Commission, and we're looking particularly at science and innovation, and this is the foresight unit, so they're really looking about 2030 to 2050. And the question that we're asking us, what should we do in science on now, and technology now, to be ready for 2030, 2050? Do we really have to look at the Nexus as a key element for European policy into the future? Which is quite a challenging question for us. So the objectives of our study, which we did with another small SME in Spain called Prospectica, which is part of the Millennium Project, they're experts on foresight, and ourselves, High Catalyst, we're a startup, we're only two-year-old small company, and we're kind of really about knowledge transfer from university. We really were trying to identify the main signals and trends, possible disruptive events, and then what would be the emerging priorities for research and innovation and potential business that could actually eventually come out of this. Okay, so the methodology that we used was based basically, we had 4 stages. We're now basically compiling the final report, which is quite hard work because we have loads of information. So the first part was a state of the art, where we reviewed about 80 or so minimal kind of reports, that have been produced. We also then expert interviews with about 86 people. Then we did a Delphi survey, which is, this kind of methodology that people in foresight are particularly keen on, to try and understand, future trends. And then we had a final kind of validation workshop in Brussels about 3 weeks ago, where Regina kindly attended, flew all the way from the States to kind of give us the views also from this side of the Atlantic. And in a way, what I wanted to kind of, this is the kind of report that eventually we will have to produce, which is why I'm kind of a bit overwhelmed. Okay, so the methodology of the expert sample, I wanted for you to see that we had about, I would actually argue, 2/3 really were European, but European, I mean, most of Europe, not so it was relatively well spread between the different European countries. And then we also had some experts also from abroad, both in the interviews and also in the Delphi. The gender, unfortunately, is very typical. 2/3 men, 1/3 women. But, maybe this is something that we will manage to change with the Nexus. Who knows? Okay, so the methodology. In a way, kind of what I wanted to explain is that the state-of-the-art review, because I'm an academic, most of the studies that we read were really written on about 2-3 years. So as you can see there, maybe the most 10 years. But you can see the exponential growth in the kind of reports that are being produced in relation to the Nexus. As I said, the 2005 is not representative because we only stopped reading in April, because then we had to move on to the next part of the study. So you can see there but that's also relatively young in a way. And what that gave us was the grounding, particularly for the closed questions in the interviews, because then we had open questions. So we had an opportunity what the evidence was telling us was the key topics, and we probably identified about 100 different topics because it's a huge area. And then we also had open questions, so we could validate in a way what the experts would actually come up with that maybe we hadn't seen in the literature. And that's why I say about present and past, because the past was really about the last 10 years. The experts were telling us what they think about in the present, whereas the Delphi study was really projecting all those key trends into the future. Okay, so the real-time Delphi, as I said, there is 14 documented future statements, 3 open questions, and then a question on disruptive events. It's very kind of typical Delphi methodology, and we kind of hosted it within the Millennium Project, which is this big global project on foresight. Okay, so with the methodology, what we identified for the Delphi, these topics that we have here, and again, like the previous speakers, I will make our slides kind of available to everyone if you're interested. So these topics came out as the top topics from when we did the interviews and the literature review. So from the study that we've done, in a way, what we think are going to be the up-and-coming important issues, related to the circular economy. The European Commission has just launched a big bid on something called the circular economy, which is this idea that you try to recycle. It's like a human body, as the previous speaker was saying. It's a system, which tries to kind of incorporate everything. Water pollution, groundwater, water reuse and recycling, food waste, ecosystem services, climate change, efficient cooling, low water consumption, renewables, fracking, second-generation biofuels, and agriculture. I mean, you can imagine they're, big topics in themselves. But most of the experts kind of came up with this kind of 13 or 14 top topics. If you really want to understand the nexus, these are, the starting points. There was also issues related to policy and policy design, also very, very strongly on economic instruments, also on issues of implementation, arguing, okay, sometimes we actually do know what we have to do, and it's really much more about moving, as previous speaker was saying, shifting the whole system forward is the real challenge. And then the key role of regulation, and we've had a panel before just looking at regulation, so you can understand that that's can be a major driver in innovation, or in a way actually stop innovation as well. And then there's a big discussion at the moment in Europe about the concept of social innovation, i.e. societies and how we all behave and the decisions we make. Okay, so what did we find in terms of the results? We divided it in what we call the axis. So we looked at water and energy, water and food and energy. And then, in a way, to try, and then the whole nexus approach, yeah? So, for example, for the, these results are only from the closed questions, where we had identified the key topics, in this case for the whole nexus, and we asked the experts, in this case 86 experts, were the ones that replied in the end. We had more people, but that was the ones that replied. And they said that, and it's come out earlier before, I'm quite pleased when I hear speakers because I find my results validated, which is really nice. So data collection and management, and interestingly, qualitative tools. They're talking also about participatory approaches, scenario approaches are also going to be very important. In the case of water for energy, high efficiency, low water consumption systems, and then transitioning systems to low carbon are the ones, for example, for the water for energy. In the case of energy for water, I think the main thing is related to water reuse and recycling and water conservation systems. In the case of water and food, people were really talking about treated wastewater, reducing irrigation, and the productivity of rainfed agriculture. And in relation to energy food, behavioral change in consumers, sustainable consumption and production. So what is quite interesting is that when you actually look at it from the different axes of the nexus, as we say, so from one resource to another, you don't necessarily get the same things, which is in itself, I think, probably an interesting finding. Okay, so, and then in relation to the open questions, the main things that came out as most important from the open questions, climate change was very much the top kind of trend that the experts identified. And I will explain later that this became a theme that was running through the whole study about the potential disruptive effect of climate change because of extreme events. Not just climate change in itself, but the impacts of climate change is what the experts were really referring to. Population growth, floods and droughts. So in a way, floods and droughts, you see, in a way, is the same as the first one. And then, interestingly, the importance of local level, local solutions, decentralized approaches, the demand for resources. Okay. So, and then in terms of gaps in knowledge, experts was kind of pointing out, and this to me is, for me, one of the most interesting findings from our study is people. They were telling us it's not just about technology, it's not just knowing about, we can fix it technologically, but it's not implemented. We know what we have to do, but it's actually not done. And it's all about also the social gap. How do people adopt technology? How can we get people to change their behavior? If we know what we should be doing, why is it that people are not doing it and are not doing it massively? So there's a big, and of course there's a lot of work being done, for example, at the moment on Natch economics, on behavioral science. Okay, and now I'm going to take you very quickly to the results of the kind of the real-time Delphi. So I'm now shifting from the interviews to future thinking. So the results I'm going to tell you now is what the experts think for 2020, 2030, and 2050, what they think are the most probable trends that are going to become very important in 2020, 2030, 2050. So the first three, I'm only going to comment on the first three. Water pollution, they think that's going to be a major issue in 2020. Climate change, and also water reuse and recycling. These are going to be three things to watch in the kind of shorter term. Because 2020, in foresight terms, we have an expert in the audience as well. It's relatively round the corner, actually. And then, what about 2030? Here we have climate change again, and it's actually shifted one position up as becoming, probably what the experts are probably thinking is that by then the impacts of climate change could be more pervasive, so we would actually be experiencing much more into the kind of the decision-making process. Low water consumption renewables, that comes very much at the top of the kind of importance. And again, water reuse and recycling also very much at the top. Then we move on, and the typo there is 2050. Low water consumption renewables goes further up the list for experts as becoming very important. Water reuse and recycling is still there, and climate change, interestingly, drops a little bit further down the list. But you can see that the trends are interesting because it's the same kind of topics that it's just a shift a little bit in which it becomes more important depending on what time horizon you're considering. Okay, this is just the same slide, but in one, because sometimes it takes a while to absorb information. Okay, in terms of disruptive events, this list of disruptive events came out from the interviews where we had an open question and we said to the experts, what to you are the most disruptive events in the Nexus? So we didn't have any say whatsoever in what they identified. This is the topics that the experts themselves identified as potentially very disruptive for the Nexus. Okay, and then this is actually what we had for the interviews. And again, the top hit is climate change. Climate change and extreme events at the very top of the list for the experts as becoming the most that's myself. Oops. Okay, and then again, the disruptive events. This is actually quite interesting. Oops, sorry. I'll run because I'm kind of at the end anyway. What we have here is in the interviews, it's interesting because you can actually see that if we move to what we call the present to the future, it's slightly different. So for example, renewables become quite important in the disruptive events because they think that if we actually adopt renewables on a massive scale, that could be very disruptive. And also when we mentioned about renewables, I also wanted to emphasize that what the experts were also referring to was decentralized systems. So we actually changed the energy system itself to a much more decentralized model, which is based on renewables. And then, see, is there? However, fisheries, for example, in the interviews, it was considered not very important. And when we actually put it into the Delphi, we projected forward. Some of the experts are actually saying, we could have a massive collapse of our fisheries if we don't do something about it. And remember that in some areas in the world, about 80% of their diet comes from fish. So that is actually a Nexus link there. Okay, so, and this is my last slide, so thankfully got there. We're still analyzing our results. We're writing the report at the moment. And what I wanted to kind of share with you is that what we're trying to see is among a lot of information. You can imagine 86 interviews, 156 Delphi survey, and then the reports that we've read. It's like a bit of mind-boggling. But we are seeing patterns. And that's why I put that picture there. There's a little chair behind, if you can actually just spot it. Climate change and extreme events, very, very much at the very top. That it comes through and through. It wasn't very much in the state-of-the-art review. It was very much in the experts. And in the Delphi, it was just really emphasized, and the importance becoming greater and greater. Water as a system boundary, other people have mentioned it. And interestingly, because my colleague mentioned it, and we were discussing it at dinner, water pricing as a major disruptive potential event. If we price water, and we valued it and priced it accordingly, that could be a game changer. But interestingly, water is not going to be the one that changes the whole Nexus. It's actually in the world of energy, where we could actually see the game changing for the whole system. So although water, in a way, is the system boundary, because we have no substitute for water, and it's very localized, whereas energy, there's many, many choices. Water, there's only one type. Okay, we have desalination, but still. So wastewater and reuse, and interestingly, wastewater and reuse, thinking, for example, we can generate energy from wastewater. We can also use wastewater for agriculture. So we're starting to kind of understand it as system, closing the cycle. Going deeper into low carbon, it's not just about low carbon and transitioning systems. Biofuels are low carbon, but they have a huge water footprint. So we're talking maybe then third generation biofuels. Okay, that might be viable from a water perspective. For example, hydropower. Hydropower from an ecosystem perspective, has some potential issues there. So in a way, going deeper into low carbon is really shifting us towards more decentralized solar and wind, which is really what the experts are kind of hinting towards. The role of pricing, and then, as I said, finally, the role of social systems. I think sustainable consumption and production, and trying to understand what makes us tick as people in our behavior and how we can change so that we can make sure that we kind of capitalize on the synergies by shifting our systems to kind of more integrated systems. And what I wanted to say is that these patterns, I think is increasingly we relatively confident, is that independent of the method we use and the time sequence, these kind of findings were in the literature, in the interviews, and in the Delphi methodology. And with that, thank you very much.
Okay, we've got some time for questions. Yes.
A question for the first speaker. Could you comment on the prospects of increased Chinese imports of Russian natural gas?
China is diversifying the source of natural gas. So, in addition to the gas from Central Asia, China is, trying to import gas from Russia, and the Ukraine crisis actually gave a price to China, which actually make the deal easier because China has negotiating with Russia for years, and then eventually just with this crisis, eventually Russia was pushed to this, but then Chinese is over the history has not been trustful of what Russians are doing, and there is a very sentiment in Chinese people doing business in Russia where no honor of contracts. So China is really, I think, is hopefully politically and geopolitical reason can draw the nation together, but then China is not wholly relying on the import of Russian gas. Yeah.
I was intrigued by the first speaker's comment on the fact that Siemens left China working on water because of the price of water. IBM did a study several years ago, and one of the things that they found was there's no correlation between the price of water and supply. In other words, the price of water tends to be very political. In China, how is water priced?
Water price is like it's 1.8. It's like 20 cents. Okay, how much is it? 1.8 yuan per a square meter. That's very low price actually. And China just raised the water resources tax, recently. But then it's very gradual because China doesn't want to, cause the complaint from the public. So you're right that the pricing of water is very political in China. So China, on one hand, does want to increase the price, and actually, people I talk to all agree that because of low price, people are wasting water as resources. But on the other hand, if the prices are increasing dramatically, and then public cannot accept that. So it has to be done step by step. And also, China is trying to have different categories of pricing for water, as for industrial use, as for household use, and that also trying to make the water for households use still at the acceptable level, but then higher for industrial use. So there is experiment on that, and I think that's Siemens left when I was there. We have some divestment of the water projects, and because the low price makes every water waste treatment project very thin in profit margin. So therefore, there's no economic purpose for doing that. and people are driven by the shareholders' value. So people to look at this, and then there's no point in doing that. So.
Yes, sir.
Since production of electricity by coal or oil is more polluting than nuclear, and France, most electricity is produced by nuclear, do they have less problems with polluted water?
I think the main issue of pollution in Europe is actually more from diffuse contamination, so nitrates, rather than industrial. I think because of the kind of water directives that we've had over the last 20 years, the water quality in European rivers has improved, and the biggest issue now is actually related to diffuse pollution from agriculture, including France. I think the main issue with nuclear power in France recently has been low flows due to the drought. And they had some issues in 2003 and also some issues this summer. And what they did, so it was more quantity rather than quality in relation to nuclear. And what they did is they changed the regulation. So they kind of they're allowed to take a bit more water at the moment than they were, for example, in 2003.
Yes, sir.
Thank you both for your wonderful presentations. I've had the privilege of going to China many, many times, meeting many wonderful people. There's a saying, the mountains are high, but the emperor is very far away. Some of my experience has been that polluters in municipalities will just move their factories out of the municipality when they are under scrutiny of jurisdictional problems. What is the impact of the new environmental czar that has been appointed, I think, who was the former president of Tsinghua University? Will there be more enforcement mechanisms to be able to clean and revitalize the beautiful country of China?
Thank you very much for this question. Yes, Chinese has this culture, what you said, the sky is high and then you're far away from the emperor, so you don't have the same, attitude for enforcing the law. And so that's exactly the problem of Chinese enforcement laws. On one hand, Chinese enforcement law is not ideal. It has many loopholes, and also the penalty is not severe enough. And what I call it doesn't have teeth, to address the damages issues. And secondly, even though the law are there, the enforcement is always a problem because in the past 30 years, China has been focusing on the rapid GDP growth. So politically, the officials' number one job is to get the GDP growth, even though it's at the cost of the environmental pollution. So you can see very often, very ironically, that the bureau chief of the environmental bureau is actually trying to protect and defending the pollution of the local enterprises because they want to achieve the target of the GDP. And so therefore, with this system, you can never, expect that the laws can be well enforced. And also there's corruption that the bureau chiefs of environmental bureau can be corrupted, being, paid for, trying to letting the polluters pass. So that's, I see, is both a system problem for China to reform its regulatory system as well as changing people's attitudes, that this is a culture that China has to change, that China should not disregard the law when you are far away from the emperor.
Okay, I can smell lunch, so let's make this the last question. Does anyone want to?
So you briefly mentioned one of the outcomes was changing social behavior, and Kate also mentioned about changing social behavior. What do you think is the best way to push it in developed nations which have never seen this urgency of water?
Oh, that's a tough question. I think one of the things that I think we will see is a generational change. I think they're now talking about the millennial generation. I think that actually is going to could play a role. At least in Europe, I think, increasingly young people, they don't own cars, they don't want cars. They would rather use BlaBlaCar or Uber or whatever. So also the environmental values are changing, so I think that could be, I think we're starting to understand more about, as I said, Natch economics is becoming quite interesting, trying to understand what makes us tick as people. But I think, in a way, we just highlighted that it's a big black box, but maybe we should look into open the box and look into it and try to understand it better. In a way, what we're saying is we have to do more research into social behavior and understanding attitudes and values.
Okay, I'd like to thank our panelists. And if you'll join us in the Commons, we'll have lunch for you.